Hello, welcome to the April 2021 First Friday presented by Carl Schoedel. I am Emily Stern, the Education Specialist for ISPE. Our topic today is Longmeadow Parkway, Kane County's second once-in-a-lifetime project. The link for the quiz questions have been placed in the chat box. In order to receive a PDH, you must complete the quiz and answer 4 out of 5 questions correctly. Please place your questions in the chat box and we'll get to that at the end of the presentation. With that, I will turn everything over to Carl.
Well, thanks, Emily, and thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. The title of our presentation, as Emily mentioned, is Longmeadow Parkway, Kane County's second once-in-a-lifetime project. We call it that because it's sort of impossible to talk about Longmeadow Parkway without first understanding a little bit about the Stearns Road corridor, which we called our once-in-a-lifetime project at that time. Stearns was a huge undertaking for local government to undertake, with a price tag of about $200 million, give or take, and a timeline that spanned 2 decades. So it was not a surprise that we started calling Stearns our once-in-a-lifetime project. So we're excited today to talk to you about Longmeadow Parkway, which is our second once-in-a-lifetime project. And in case you don't know, Longmeadow is a 5.6-mile regional arterial corridor, mainly on new alignment, with a new bridge over the Fox River. Our estimated all-in price tag will be around $160 million, including engineering and land acquisition. Uh-oh. There we go. So this handsome gentleman that you're looking at here, oops, wow, is who looks like he's running for president is me. I have about 35 years of professional experience, the last 24 of which has been at Kane County. And then I've been in a leadership role at Kane County since about 2003. So in other words, I came in the middle of the Longmeadow Parkway project, sort of a relative newcomer. You'll notice I put slide numbers at the bottom right corner of every slide. I'm going to use those, or you can use those if you have a specific question that you want to ask. I can kind of go back to that at the end during the Q&A portion. And I've got 48 slides to go through, so I'll try to keep an eye on the clock and make sure we fit within the allotted window. So here's an outline of what we're going to talk about today. First, I'll give you an overview of the project, where we stand in terms of construction. And then I will kind of go back and tell the story chronologically, more or less, through the 3 decades that we've been working on this project. Then, because I know I'm talking to a bunch of engineers, I'll talk a little bit about some of the innovative solutions that we use for Longmeadow Parkway. It's not going to be a super nerdy talk. It's more like a history lesson, but hopefully there's some things that you can take away from this that will help you in your daily jobs as well. Finally, we'll move into some of the challenges that we faced that were not necessarily engineering related, and then also talk a little bit about the political dynamics, the organized opposition that we faced on the project. And then I will end with what is sort of a unique piece of the corridor, which is the fact that we are proposing to toll the bridge, and we've actually sold bonds for the construction of the bridge, and we intend to pay back the bonds with the revenue from those tolls. All right, so a quick overview. So this map that you see on the right is actually out of the a large environmental impact statement, of which Longmeadow Parkway and Stearns were both considered as part of that large EIS. The map basically shows the eastern section of Kane County running from, and that's the Fox River that you see running through there, Algonquin on the north end of the county, all the way down to, say, Yorkville and Kendall County on the south end of the county. This grew out of in the early 90s, there was a Fox River Bridge study group that was formed to look at all the possible crossings from Algonquin to Yorkville. There were over 20 different corridors that we looked at. And of those got narrowed down to these 5 that you see on the screen. And those were deemed to be potentially regional in nature. And so we studied those more formally as part of this environmental impact statement, which began roughly 1990. So that's 3 decades ago, in case you're counting. As the EIS progressed and we got towards the end, 3 of the 5 corridors actually were deemed to have met the purpose and need, meaning that they moved regional traffic across the river. 2 of the corridors did not move forward, but for example, the Redgate Bridge Corridor did not serve a regional need, but was actually later constructed by the city of St. Charles as more of a local bridge crossing. So some of this early study work did carry over to projects that even didn't meet the original purpose and need. As far as the 3 that surfaced out of this, the EIS, Kane County took the lead on 2 of the corridors, and that's Longmeadow Parkway and Stearns. The 3rd corridor was the Route 56 Oak Street corridor in North Aurora. And since that was basically a realignment of a state highway, we decided not to take on that one at that time. So as jumping back to Stearns a little bit, our first once-in-a-lifetime project that opened to traffic in 2010. I trained all my friends and colleagues to call it the award-winning Stearns Road project. It was unique in several ways. One is just the size and the scope of it, but also that something like 2/3 of the footprint was set aside for open space and environmental mitigation. So it was a very green corridor, and hence the color of the bridge that we chose. The picture that you see there is the ribbon cutting, and in the kind of lower right corner is Victor Mendez. He's the administrator of the Federal Highway Administration at the time. He was originally from Arizona and found that December 15th in Kane County was a little brisk for his taste. But he really liked the project, and he liked the cute fox logo that we had on the bridge. All right, so back to Longmeadow Parkway. Here's a map of the entire corridor that I'll describe to you in a little bit more detail. Everything that you see in green is now complete, and then everything that you see in orange is under construction. And then there's a small black piece there, item C4, which is the toll collection facility itself. So the gantries, the roadside equipment, and all of that infrastructure that's necessary to collect tolls will be the last piece that goes. That's actually been bid and awarded, and construction should start later this year. So we were advised to do that piece last because technology is changing, and so you want to take advantage of the latest technology. So a little bit more detail about where we stand in the construction. In roughly 2016, we started construction on the far western edge of the corridor. That's what's labeled there as Section A1. We basically did that because we had the land acquisition was complete and we were able to move to construction. This is the only section of the corridor that we built as a 2-lane highway. The rest of the corridor moving east is 4-lane arterial with all turn lanes. The reason that we built this as a smaller cross section is that this is largely open farm field actually, and just prime for development. It's right on the Randall Road corridor at the intersection with Longmeadow. And so our thought was that as development occurs there, it would be reasonable to expect a future developer to widen that highway to meet the direct needs of their development. So we built just a 2-lane section. The 2-lane connection is very important though, because it allows traffic coming from the west to connect easily into the corridor and just flow the next 5 miles or so across the river towards the east. There was a little bit of a risk with this segment. We built this in 2016, as I said, and it actually did not connect to Randall Road. So we had roughly a 1-mile piece of highway that was basically a road to nowhere. So there was a little bit of a risk, but it also kept our own feet to the fire, so to speak, in terms of making sure that we got to the next section in the following construction season. So jumping forward, let's see, the next segment moving to the east, you see is labeled A2/B1. That one was built the following season, and in that area, the character of the land is mainly residential in nature. And this actually was sort of the heart of the organized opposition that I'll talk about later. But basically, people didn't want a new road in their backyard, and that was kind of the gist of the opposition. And then also, and then we just kind of started moving to the east. Contract B2 there picks up where the other one left off and moves down the hill towards Illinois Route 31. And then contract C1, you see there, that's the section that actually includes the bridge over the Fox River. And that's largely complete, although it's not open to traffic because it really doesn't connect to anything on the east end of the project there. And then on the far right-hand part of your screen, you see contract D, contract C3, and also contract D. Those connect into Illinois Route 62 on the east end of the corridor in the Barrington Hills area. The part that's under construction right now is contract C2. That one basically ties everything together. You can see some of the local roads just sort of below and parallel to the corridor. That's the Bowles Road connector that allows local access. We tied in there with a roundabout. And contract C2 is in the area of an old quarry. So there is some complications there that I'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. But it's moving along swiftly, and we hope to open everything sometime in 2022. And then, as I mentioned, the very last section is the toll facility itself that's let and awarded and should start construction in 2021. All right, so now I'm going to jump back and talk about the project development going back to about 1990 or so. That's when we started spending money on the project, but actually to understand it, you actually need to go back a little bit further in time. This project had been identified as a need in municipal land use plans going back to the 1950s. And then you see there a specific reference in 1974, the village of Algonquin shows the Longmeadow Bridge Corridor more or less on the alignment that it ultimately took. And so there's very specific reference to that as far back as 1974, but it had been identified in various municipal plans as early as 1950. You might want to remember that number as you start to take the quiz questions later. So in 1990, I mentioned that there was a bridge advisory committee that was formed. This was local leaders, mayors, county officials, and it was sort of headed up by our influential congressman at the time. And the idea was to look at all potential bridge crossings of the Fox River between basically the entire length of Kane County. So between Algonquin on the north and Yorkville on the south. As I mentioned, that effort sort of narrowed down the 20-some opportunities to 5 that were studied for potential river crossings, and those were conducted as part of one large environmental impact statement. Another thing that occurred there in the 90s as that residential development began, the village of Algonquin went above and beyond in terms of notifying potential homeowners there. So they actually created a letter of awareness that a home buyer would sign at closing, and that the letter of awareness basically said, I am aware that there will be a 4-lane highway running through this area. It was shown as part of the plat of subdivision. And then every individual homeowner that was adjacent to the corridor signed that letter at closing. And that letter was then recorded against the property, meaning that if the property changed hands, that letter would show up as part of the title search. So that was very helpful to us in terms of putting people formally on the record, but it didn't mean that we later wouldn't get accused of trying to hide stuff on people. So it just goes to show that you can never do too much in terms of notification. The village of Carpentersville and Algonquin both set aside land for the corridor as part of development plans and subdivision plats. So that was very helpful. In the decade of, once the EIS was completed, and that was formally in 2002, that decade of the 2000s, we basically began the hard engineering in earnest. So with all of the environmental hurdles cleared, we started phase 1 engineering on Stearns and Longmeadow Parkway, both. The initial funding was a significant amount of the funding for Stearns Road was actually an earmark out of the federal transportation bill. I'll talk about that a little bit later. That was a large earmark. The earmark for Longmeadow, on the other hand, was small. It was $4 million. And when you consider a total price tag of over $100 million, it was just sort of some seed money. And so as we progressed the engineering and got closer to construction, this idea of tolling the bridge and trying to fund something that way began to take root. So I'll get into that as we move forward. In a little bit more detail about what was happening then. So we submitted that draft EIS early in 2001 and got the final approval of that in 2002. As I mentioned, there were 3 corridors that came out of that large EIS effort as meeting the purpose and need. and Stearns and Longmeadow were the two that Kane County took the lead on. And that made them officially eligible for federal highway funding and for all of the remaining phases, including engineering, land acquisition, and construction. Coincidentally, or maybe not, around the same time, there was a group of environmentalists, I guess you'd call them, who filed a lawsuit against Federal Highway, Kane County, and all of the federal agencies, basically saying that Longmeadow Parkway did not meet the National Environmental Protection Act, and they had a number of reasons why they thought that was the case. Ultimately, the Federal Highway Administration and the county prevailed, and that lawsuit was essentially thrown out. So in the middle of that decade, in 2005, the federal transportation bill called SafetyLOU, don't ask me what that stands for anymore, but SafetyLOU was signed by President Bush, and we had a ceremonial signing of that document in the village of Montgomery at the Caterpillar plant. And so at that point in time, Stearns and Longmeadow had been progressing on a parallel track. Neither one was considered a priority over the other. But as you can see, when the earmarks came out and Stearns was got one of the largest federal earmarks ever, that one obviously became a more real project and began to progress faster than the Longmeadow Parkway did. So between that earmark in 2005 and 2010, we completed and opened Stearns Road to traffic. Meanwhile, Longmeadow, we're still trying to figure out how we're going to pay for the thing. So here's a photo I snapped that day at the ceremonial signing. This was our freshman senator from Illinois, showed up by himself without an entourage and no security detail, just a regular guy. And there he is chatting with one of the reporters from the Daily Herald. I took that photo with my county issued Nextel flip phone, so only the latest technology for us. All right, so we're progressing with the engineering on Longmeadow Parkway, and we're trying to figure out how we're going to pay for this thing. Some county board members and some municipal leaders, mayors from the northern part of Kane County, got together and basically said, we support this corridor so much so that we're willing to toll ourselves in order to help pay for it. So there was actually a task force formed of area municipalities and both in Kane County and in McHenry, because this corridor is about a mile from the McHenry line. At the end of that 3-year toll feasibility study, we had formal resolutions of support from 9 area municipalities and the 2 counties involved, McHenry and Kane. So there was a lot of formal governmental support for the corridor. So the EIS was complete for Longmeadow Parkway, but obviously in 2002, we did not consider the option of a toll. So the Federal Highway Administration asked us to reevaluate the EIS in the form of an EA. So that's what we did. Obviously, when you put a toll on a facility, that changes some of the dynamics. Like some people maybe are not willing to pay a toll, so it might divert some of the traffic. And if anything, it was a fairly easy exercise, because if anything, we could demonstrate that the impacts of the corridor would be equal or less than they had been anticipated when we were not considering a toll option. All right, so we'll jump ahead to the next decade, 2010. I mentioned the reevaluation of the EIS. We had to update basically everything that was in the EIS, newer endangered species. And during this decade, also, the support from the area municipalities increased. But also there was sort of this vocal group of residents in the Algonquin area in particular that sort of were the NIMBYs, to use a pejorative term. They didn't want a new road in their backyard, and they heard the word toll, and they were sort of envisioning something like the Illinois tollway. Well, this is really more a local arterial road, and I think a lot of that opposition tended to go away after we started constructing, and they saw, oh, this is not as big of a deal as we thought it would be. Also, near the end of that decade, we sold bonds for the construction of the bridge, and the bonds are intended to be paid back by toll revenues. Throughout, we started with that $4 million earmark, and we're trying to fund a project that will be, say, $160 million by the time we get done. So staff worked very hard at pursuing every opportunity that we could for federal dollars. Over time, through different ways, we were able to cobble together about $20 million of federal funds. We applied for Tiger. I think we were a 7-time loser on that, but you have to try and be told no. And we also, during that time, reminded the state of Illinois that they had an old commitment out there as part of the overall EIS to help fund this project to the tune of about $40 million. And the rationale behind that is kind of twofold. Basically, we would be doing something like $35 million of direct improvements to state highways as we cross them at Route 25, Route 31, and Route 62. But in addition to that, we would be building this corridor that would take traffic off of the heavily congested state highways at Route 62 and at Route 72, which are sort of north and south of this corridor. So we would take traffic off of the state highways, we would improve state highways, and so there was a rationale for the state to participate in this project financially. Another requirement was that, because the project is so large, was that we would need to create this financial plan showing how we intended to pay for the project, and the tolls and all of these other elements were elements of that. Okay, we'll switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the interesting engineering solutions that came up during the project. Near the end of the phase 1 engineering, we did a value engineering study. This was something that was suggested or possibly required, depending on who you talk to, by the Federal Highway Administration. And we did not resist that suggestion because we thought that it might result in some good ideas before we moved into the phase 2 design. And so, as you can see there, you get a bunch of experts in the room, and you sort of spitball and you talk about things that might work better. There were 126 different ideas that were tossed about, and then after those were studied more carefully, 23 of those moved forward into the actual design. So those were things such as the type of structure, the main structure over the Fox River, the pavement design, different ways of handling the earthwork, and drainage design. And I'll cover some of the key aspects here in the next couple slides. There are two areas that really were important to the ultimate design. I'll talk about those next. So what you see here on your slide is that picture at the bottom is the Longmeadow Parkway Corridor. To your left is west and to your right is east. So that's the intersection with Illinois Route 31, which is on the west side of the river. So if you're familiar with the area, and you're probably not, but as you head from west to east, you're going down a large bluff towards the river valley. The phase one engineering actually contemplated a major cut section in this area, and I'm remembering cuts of up to 40 feet to try to bring that highway down to grade by the time you got to Route 31. So it's a huge earthwork moving job in this section of the corridor. So a lot of that soil wasn't going to be able to be used on the corridor, elsewhere on the corridor. And even if it was, you'd have to, since the bridge isn't built yet, you would have to truck that around in long distances. And a lot of the cost of the earthwork related to that trucking cost. We were able to identify a nearby forest preserve sledding hill called Raging Buffalo, and the Forest Preserve was interested in improving their sled hill by adding soil to it. So here we were with large quantities of excess soil, which less than a mile from this facility. And we were also able to work out a haul road on Forest Preserve property. So we basically take that soil directly to the site and without even impacting traffic on any like Route 31, for example. So it was a win-win. It saved us money. It improved the local recreational opportunities, and just something that we're proud of in terms of value added. This is one of the things that came out of that value engineering study. In several places in the corridor, we introduced MSE Walls, mechanically stabilized earth. The impact of that is essentially you don't have to build as much embankment, so the embankment costs are lower. Obviously, that's more than offset by the cost of the MSE wall, but the size of the footprint on the environment was enough of a value for us to consider and implement MSE walls in several places, at the main bridge and then at a few of the smaller bridges on the east side of the river. Another key aspect that came out of that value engineering study is the Route 31 overpass. So the phase one engineering contemplated bringing that Longmeadow Parkway all the way down to grade and having a traditional intersection at Route 31. And I mentioned that 40-foot cut that wouldn't be needed to do that. One of the ideas was don't try to get down to grade and just bring Longmeadow Parkway over Route 31 on a structure, on a bridge. And it seemed a little counterintuitive that building a bridge would actually be a cost-saving device, but the amount of excess earth excavation that we got rid of by doing that more than offset the cost of that structure. So that was another cool idea that came to fruition out of that value engineering study. You can see here some of the basically bike path improvements that we incorporated into the corridor. At the top, that's a bike path that is internal to the Bruner Forest Preserve, and the structure there will carry that path over Longmeadow Parkway. And this is just immediately west of the river, so you get some nice views of the river from up there. And then at the bottom is where we were able to reroute and integrate the Fox River Trail into our construction project and bring that underneath one of the structures that we were building on the east side of the river. All right, I'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we had on this project. These are not necessarily engineering related, but just to give you a flavor of like some of the exciting things that we saw along the corridor. I mentioned that we studied 5 regional bridge corridors, all as part of one environmental impact statement. So my advice to you is, if anybody ever says, hey, let's just study all 5 of these in one giant EIS, don't do it. It overcomplicates everything. You know, we had to do public meetings in 3 different areas of the county. Anytime we wanted to do anything, we had to do it 3 times. So it sounded good on paper at first, but it just made everything exponentially more complicated. And so that's one of my takeaways is don't ever do a giant EIS from hell. Oh, and I also mentioned that there was at least one corridor, the Redgate Bridge Corridor, that did not meet the purpose and need from this EIS, but actually ended up getting built as a smaller local bridge crossing in the city of St. Charles. So that was another interesting aspect. This is a headline out of the Chicago Tribune, I believe. McDonough Associates was our phase 1 engineer for Longmeadow Parkway, and as we were approaching the end of our phase 1, a new IDOT procurement officer actually decided to rigidly enforce the state procurement rules and banned McDonough Associates from taking public work for a period of 3 years. And so in effect, what that did was it eventually put McDonough out of business. And here we were trying to wrap up our highest profile project, and the firm is sort of disappearing in front of our eyes. So it was through the efforts of a few remaining staffers at McDonough and our own staffers at Kane County, we sort of cobbled together the best that we could and finished up the project development report ourselves and got that in. It probably wasn't our best effort, but we knew that, and we knew that there would be plenty of work to do during the phase 2 engineering as a result of that. The FHWA is requiring basically a reevaluation of everything on an annual basis. So we've done that in 2016, 2017, 2018, and I think we'll continue to reevaluate everything until we're done. Some of the environmental challenges, we're in an area where it was a potential of finding the northern long-eared bat. Not that anybody ever did, but as a result, we needed to clear trees only during the winter time frame. So in effect, it sort of added another phase of construction to every section of the project that we built. So we had to make sure that we had a winter period before we actually entered into the full construction of the mainline road construction. As if land acquisition and engineering wasn't tricky enough, it's kind of like one more thing on top of all of that. A couple of other species meant that in the area meant that we needed to stay out of the river, the Fox River, during the spawning period. So that's summer. So any work in river needed to occur in the winter, and then we needed to stay out of the river during the summertime. This is one of my favorites, the rusty patch bumblebee. It was a newly listed species, a threatened and endangered species in 2017. We were actually at the time building our second section of the project, that was section A2B1. And we happened to be in court again with another group of environmentalists, and so they seized that opportunity to file a temporary restraining order with the court. Also, the judge that was originally hearing that case had unexpectedly passed away, and so there was a new judge assigned, and all of this happened sort of simultaneously. So the new judge came in, and I mean, I don't think she knew what to do right away, so she actually granted the temporary restraining order. So we're under construction. It's the middle of the, it's the middle of the summer. The weather's great, but we're banned from doing any work because of this temporary restraining order. The good news, though, is that it was a short-term delay. The judge, after studying all the facts, lifted that TRO, and we were able to finish that project during the same construction season. Just had to push it right up until November. And then ultimately, that court case that I mentioned was dismissed. So talk a little bit about the organized opposition that we faced. We were able to attract Barrington Hills as a supporter of this project up until such time as I think they realized, oh, we were seriously going to build this thing. And so in 2015, they actually sort of undid their support of the project. If you know anything about Barrington Hills, they're sort of opposed to almost anything. And so it was really great news that we had them on board at one point in time, but that sort of evaporated as we got closer to construction, unfortunately. There were 2 lawsuits, as I mentioned, the earlier one in 2002. We were successful on that. And then another one in 2016, which was very similar. Many of the allegations were the same. And so that case got through relatively quickly in about 2 years or so. And we prevailed on that one as well. There was a referendum put to the ballot by a number of the organized opposition group, and was sort of worded backwardly. In other words, if you opposed the project, you needed to vote yes. And then, as you can see there, it sort of didn't paint a very flattering picture of Longmeadow Parkway. So that one actually passed just barely, but it was an advisory referendum. It really did not have any significant impact on the progress of the project, other than just kind of raising some political fodder for opponents. Here's a picture of some of the groups. We were wondering if they were going to chain themselves to the trees, but they didn't. Again, I think they had worse visions of what the corridor was going to look like than it actually was. And so now that the thing is built and they see it in their backyard, I think a lot of the opposition has legitimately gone away. These guys actually started a GoFundMe page to help fund that lawsuit that I talked about in 2016. And I think in large part, the lawsuit stopped basically when they ran out of money for paying their attorneys there. And maybe related to opposition and maybe not, but we had on the east side of the river, that's the picture at the bottom, we had impacted a small amount of the Hickory Hills Park in the Dundee Township Park District. So as a result of that, we needed to buy some replacement property for them. And it was at like a 3-to-1 ratio. So if we impacted 1 acre on the east side, we bought 3 acres for them, and they wanted it actually on the west side of the river. So we identified this piece, followed all the instructions of the IDNR and the National Park Service, and actually got approval from the National Park Service that that was acceptable back in 2013. And then out of the blue, in 2017, the National Park Service sent us a letter saying that they were rescinding their approval, and they cited a lack of documentation, to which we promptly replied with a box load of documentation, but it was clear that they were not going to change their mind. And so we had already transferred this property to the Park District. They were very happy with it, but guess what? We had to go out and find another replacement property for them, which we have also done by this point in time. All right, so the last topic I'm going to talk about here is tolling the bridge. This is an aspect that most local governments don't get to do as part of their projects, but I think in an era where earmarks are not going to be as common as they used to be, innovative funding solutions like this could be sort of the wave of the future. So, as I mentioned, this contract C4 is the last one to go to construction. It's the bridge. This is where the toll collection facility will be. This is the gantries, the roadside equipment, and everything that's needed to capture the transponders and read license plates and all of that. We had some interesting opportunities. Obviously, if you're in the business long enough, you think you know everything, but if you've never run a tollway before, you probably don't. So we had to perform a formal traffic and revenue study. We did also an operations and maintenance study. Those were both things that were recommended to us. And then prior to selling the bonds, we had to convince the rating agencies that we deserved a good bond rating. And what that does is that lowers basically the interest rate that you pay on those bonds. So we made a trip down to the Standard & Poor's office in Chicago and went over the county's finances. And as a result of that meeting, we attained a AA+ rating and pretty good rates on our bonds. Initially, we thought that we would have to be allied with the Illinois Tollway, and they would be our agent and would just charge us a certain amount of fee for their services. But as time went on, we actually the rules changed a little bit, and we were allowed to join the Easy Pass group, which is a consortium of toll agencies from Illinois all the way over to the East Coast. So our ability to join that group directly and take out the Illinois Tollway acting as our middleman, we believe saved us significant dollars. We had issued a request for a proposal for a toll collection services contract. That one has been awarded to a firm called A2B. And this is, again, to design and install the roadside equipment and figure out what tolls to charge different size vehicles, read transponders, read sticker tags, capture license plate issues, and transfer all of that information to the back office for processing. We also issued a separate contract for back office services, and that was issued to ETC, which is a local firm. They do a lot of work with the Illinois Tollway, but basically that's the back end of things that you don't see, but it's everything necessary to keep the records and work with the customers to make sure that we're getting paid for those tolls that are crossing the bridge. And then, as I mentioned, we're part of that Easy Pass group, so we have to basically at the end of every month reconcile if we owe money to another agency or vice versa. That all gets worked out as part of that Easy Pass arrangement. So almost wrapping up, the moral of the story, this one has been going on for 30 years. So, you know, what I would highlight in particular is the municipal leadership. They really felt strongly about this project. And in many ways, it was a municipal project. It was that group of 9 municipalities that really wanted this to happen. I would say without that leadership, we wouldn't be doing this project. And the county had the ability and the necessary statutes in place that allowed us to be sort of the lead agency. But I still say that it's a municipal-led project. In particular, a gentleman by the name of John Schmidt was the president of the village of Algonquin. He was really just a champion for the project and made sure that it was going to happen. Sadly, John passed away last fall, and so he won't be able to see the completed corridor when we open it next year. But we were able to arrange for him to drive the different sections of the corridor as we open them up over time. And so we feel good about that. The other thing that's interesting here is over 30 years, there's sort of a consistency. I'm thinking about 4 different county board chairmen, 3 different county engineers, and literally dozens of different county board members. And there was always sort of this focus, and we didn't take our eye off the ball, and we didn't change our minds. And so we were able to slowly over time build enough momentum on this huge and important project to get it across the goal line. I talked a little bit about some of the innovation that we did in terms of just kind of keeping the project moving by doing what was ready. So once we acquired land in one area, we built that project. And as soon as we acquired the next piece, we built that. So just keep the momentum going and don't lose momentum, because especially in a case where you have some organized opposition, that could be a problem. And then I talked about all of the challenges that we faced and sort of just our ability to absorb that and bounce back and not give up. And I think all of those 5 things together, that's what made this project or will have made this project a success when we get done next year. So with that, I have completed my formal presentation, and I believe Emily was going to take questions if anybody had questions.
Yes, thank you, Carl. It looks like we have one question. Will Kane County be installing bat houses for the potential bat colony like the something Drive Bridge in Houston, Texas?
I think I understand the question.
Okay.
I think the short answer to that question is no. Our studies never revealed the presence of any endangered bat species, although we had to take care with tree removal and a number of other things. Therefore, there was no special mitigation required, and so we're not building any bat houses that I know of. However, we are planting something like 11,000 trees in the corridor. So over time, we are introducing habitat that could be used by those species. Hopefully that answers your question.
And another question here. How long was the project sections overall?
Let me give that a shot. So the entire corridor is 5.6 miles in length. And as part of engineering, we decided to break that up into 4 pieces. It was A, B, C, and D. And the reason we did that was to kind of have smaller size projects, more like the size project that we're used to building. So for us, a $20 million job is huge. So if you break up this $160 million corridor into 4 chunks, it gets closer to the size of the project that we're used to building. Also, that spreads out the workload across different engineering consultants and doesn't sort of overwhelm the industry just with a single project. So that's what we did for engineering, and those pieces were, roughly a quarter, so a mile and a half long pieces. The piece by the river is a little bit longer that connects Route 31 to Route 25 and crossing the Fox River. I think that one's closer to 2 miles total. And then the other thing you'll notice when we when you see the corridor map and it's A2, B1, and C1, 2, 3, 4. So we continued to break up those sections that we engineered as one piece. We would, if we had a piece of the piece ready to go, we would break that out as a separate contract and build that. And that was all part of that strategy for keeping our momentum going. So hopefully that answers your question. Roughly the pieces, each piece was about a mile and a half in length on average.
And we have another question. What did we do with all the excess soil?
So in large part, it went to that Raging Buffalo sled hill that I focused on the west side of the river, and just north of the Bruner family farm. There's a Raging Buffalo sled hill, it's called, and they wanted to expand and increase the size of that facility, and so that's where most of that excess soil went from that side of the project.
What was the problem with McDonough Associates to be removed from the project?
We actually did not remove them from the project. They this was a IDOT procurement officer that found problems with, I believe it related to their overhead rate and the documentation of that. So they were banned from taking public work for a period of 3 years. And this was near the end of our contract with them, so we had to find a way to, they were still in business technically, but they had no hope of getting future business. So there were a lot of their staff were, jumping ship and going to other places, and so we never removed them from our project. We had to finish the phase 1 with McDonough, and that was just an extra challenge that we had to face.
We got more questions coming in. Once the bonds are paid, will the toll go away? If not, where will that revenue go?
Yeah, so I like that question, and it's a simple answer, but nobody believes us when we say it. So yes, the toll revenues go away eventually. So what we're allowed to do, and it's a different state law that counties follow as opposed to the Illinois tollway, we are allowed to toll for the purposes of paying for construction, and then you're allowed to set aside a quote unquote maintenance fund for future maintenance to that bridge. So our estimates in rough terms would be we want to raise about a total of $45 million, and that would pay for the original construction and then set aside enough money for future maintenance of the structure. So it has to go away by state law. We're not unlike the tollway, we can't expand this system. So we can't take our tolls and use it to expand other places. We actually can't use it for anything else. So it has to go away. It's just kind of a matter of when. Our bonds are 30 years in duration, so it could last 30 years. But we also have an early call option. So if we are generating more revenue than we thought, or maybe the county just decides to get rid of the toll earlier, that toll might go away as soon as 10 years from now.
Okay, please explain the mechanically enhanced embankments.
The MSE walls, as they're called, mechanically stabilized earth. You essentially build a structure to contain an embankment, and it ends up acting sort of like a retaining wall. So you build 4 walls, and inside it you place and compact the earth. Oftentimes you use granular material in there, and so that unit ends up being like a retaining wall on the sides of a bridge structure, and then so you can avoid the need to build a traditional embankment, which was side slopes. And so then the result of all of that is that it's a smaller footprint and a smaller impact on the environment.
Okay, we just have a few more questions. Are the bridge abutments also MSE walls?
I don't think we can say that throughout all of the abutments, but there are definitely MSE walls at most of the openings. So at the main crossing of the Fox River, for example, and then as you move further east, there's a smaller structure that carries Longmeadow over Sandbloom Road, and those all have MSE walls as at the openings.
Did you have to move mussels from the River Bridge site?
In this case, I believe the answer is no. I'm thinking back to the Stearns Road corridor 10 years ago, and we actually did find mussels in the construction area, and those had to be hand relocated. So you find the mussel, physically remove it, and take it upstream and put it in new habitat somewhere else outside of the zone of the construction. That was Stearns. I'm pretty sure we did not find any mussels in the Fox River in the vicinity of Longmeadow. So it was just something we had to study, but not a lot of direct impact there.
Okay, we're going to do just one last question. Were those 4 projects, A, B, C, and D, done in parallel or sequence?
Yeah, they were all done more or less in parallel. So we broke up the corridor into 4 pieces for engineering. And like I said, part of the strategy was to spread that work around so that more work could happen at the same time, rather than throwing an entire corridor at one consulting firm. That probably would have slowed down the overall progress. And so that was literally was part of the strategy, was to break it into smaller chunks and allow the work to happen in parallel.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending our presentation, and thanks Carl for your time. Make sure to take the quiz in order to receive your PDH. You can find that in the chat box. And be sure to mark your calendars for next month's First Friday on May 7th with Kyle Mishler from Civil Tech, who will be discussing recruiting and hiring during a global pandemic. So thank you and have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Happy Easter.